Hello, everyone, and welcome to this, our first bite-sized research data webinar for the semester. My name is Sean Lacey. I'm the university's Research Integrity and Compliance Officer, and I'm delighted today to be joined by Dr. Patrick Egan, who's going to lead us on the research data webinar for today. Just to give a small bit of background information so in the last academic year, we would have facilitated bite-sized research data webinars on how to password protect your research data, how to encrypt your research data, how to store and share your research data securely and on an open data repository, how to anonymize, pseudo-anonymize and de-identify your research data, and how to create your research data management plan. All those recordings for all those webinars and the slides that support the recordings, they're all up on the Research Integrity webpage, along with being up on SWORD, our institutional repository as well. And what I'll do is when Patrick takes over here, I'll pop those links into the chat so that everyone can have access to those as well. And I'm delighted then that Patrick's actually going to add on to the webinars that we had in the last academic year, whereby today's one is going to be how to complete a research data management plan. And without further ado, Patrick, I'll hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Excellent, great opportunity to present, and thanks everyone for turning up today. And for anyone else who wasn't able to make it, please let them know that we have extra information on the library website on how to complete a research data management plan. Okay, so I'll just share my screen and hopefully I'll work on there. So I've got some slides here today, and I've also got some examples on the browser as well. So I'm just going to start off by just saying I work here in the library on research data management. I do a lot of work with people on research data management plans. Various different departments come to me looking for help and information on how to do this for various different reasons. Again, just on there today, I'm passing on from what Therese is doing, the great work she did there before on the why of DMPs. And if you want to have a look at on the YouTube channel, their Research Integrity and Compliance, this is also up on SWORD, where in February, Therese goes through the whole process of why you do a DMP. And she basically starts up a data management plan, goes through all the different steps that you need to do in a short space of time. Today, I'm going to go a little bit deeper, look at an actual plan that I've done myself for my own research, and give you a little bit of an idea about how you could actually go about it yourself. So I'll look a little bit more at the FAIR principles again, and then also how to get into these documents that are needed. So many of you might be asking, okay, if you've already seen the first webinar, you might be thinking, well, where do I go in order to bring in information into my data management plan? Because when you start a plan, a lot of the time you're presented with a blank screen, and that blank screen is here on, get onto the page there now, okay, on your dashboard. If you go on to dmponline.dcc.ac.uk and sign up as an MTU researcher there, you can go into this area and have a look at how to start up the plan. And that's all covered in Therese's introduction there as well. But if I click on this example here that I worked on my PhD, the Sean Rita project, for example, you'll see that all the different fields have been filled in here, but you're usually presented with an open area here that has no information at all. On the right-hand side, you're supposed to select some guidance that gives you an idea of what the different funders and institutions are looking for along the way. And you can see the full list here. If you click on the right-hand side, it gives you a list of all the different institutions and funding bodies that provide guidance for doing the plan. Today's one I'm going to look at is the Science Europe one, which is a practical guide from Europe on how to create the DMP. And then there's also additional guidance then that was brought out after that plan to give additional kind of, let's say, tips and tricks on how to create a plan based on the other one. So basically, we've got two separate pieces of guidance from the same area in Europe, the same institution in Europe here, where we're looking at the guidance from 1 to 6. So we have 6 different sections in it, and each different section then you have to fill out the information on that. On the left-hand side, they're kind of like the requirements, the base foundation requirements that are needed in a plan. And then in the middle here, you can see the fair's fair additional guidance. And then on the right-hand side, then it tells you when you would sufficiently address items in the DMP, and sometimes when you would insufficiently address it. So it kind of gives you a good idea on how you can actually fill out a good plan and a comprehensive plan. So to go back here to the Sean Rita project, for example, anyone who's done a PhD before, you'll see your project abstract basically here on the first section of it, on the project details, your project title, and the information that's very high level. Contributors then, usually, of course, this will be for if you're collaborating with other people, and usually doesn't apply to a PhD, but for other larger projects it maybe would as well. So you can add in different principal investigators and those who are contributing to it there as well. In the plan overview then, we kind of get a very broad sense of what's being looked for in a data management plan. And this is a good place to start to get thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do for the project itself? And the next section is getting into writing a plan. And again, Trees kind of like went over this a good bit in February, but when we dig down into, let's say, the first part of the data management plan, the first question you're asked is, what data will you collect or create? And this is coming from the DCC guidance. You can see on the right-hand side here, it asks, what are the questions that I need to consider when I'm doing this? So what type of format and volume of data, and a bunch of different questions that are really kind of getting you into the specifics and asking you to come up with specific answers on the different information that's there for your plan. As you can see on the left-hand side, once I go down through it, I'm answering these questions from the right-hand side, adding in my specific data on what I'm doing in the project and what I'm planning to do. Now, Trez did say that obviously it's a living document, so it changes all the time, depending on different things that happen in a project. No project is always going to be perfect from the start to finish, but what we can do with a data management plan is we can save it, and then we come back to it later on and add more information in there. So that's the DCC guidance, but we can also pull in information from the guidance that we have in Science Europe. And if I've pulled out some of the key things that you could consider if you're creating your data management plan based on Science Europe. And if you look at, so the 6 requirements that are needed for Science Europe are written here, and they're very, very similar to the DCC requirements there as well. And I'm just going to have a closer look at the first 2, the data description and collection, and then also reuse. And then the second one is documentation and data quality. In number 1, see, they ask the question, how will new data be collected or produced, and how will existing data be reused? This is just very, very similar to what's in the DCC guidelines on the DMP website. It also asks what data then will be collected and produced, and again, it's very close to what's happening there. But what I will say is that in all these guidelines, you'll have extra questions in the Science Europe guidelines, and you'll have extra questions in DCC. And these are all to really just to guide you in order to do better research and to create a better plan. So taken together then, looking at the very first sort of like guideline that's there, it asks about data description, collection, and reuse. And on the left-hand side here, it asks us about methodologies, and it asks us about software. Are you going to be using Qualtrics for surveys, for example? Stating any constraints then on reuse of existing data. How is data provenance going to be documented? So then we're looking at where and with whom did the data start, and then how is it processed? Then you have to state your reasons for if the reuse of any existing sources has been considered but discarded. So why have other sources not been considered? So some very interesting questions for your research that you might not have thought about so far. On the right-hand side, I mentioned Fair's Fair additional guidance. And in that document, then they have an extra set of questions here that really get you down to the detail of how you can actually fill out that information. And I find that this one is actually very helpful for specifying exactly what it is they're asking as well. So what is the source of data generation? What is the model? What is the instrument? What is the methodology? What's the date or data creation or collection? So we get to think about, okay, well, what was created in a certain data set, or when a certain collection was created, so that we can track the information that's being put in there. Who were the contributors that were involved in it as well? So who actually added data to this collection or data set? What is the data versioning information there? So all of these questions would be relevant to people in different areas. It just depends on your own project itself. If I go back into this project, the PhD project, I fill out a lot of information on, this is an artist in Ireland in the 1960s, where I'm gathering information from different archives. I start to talk about the volume for this data. It's about 5 megabytes in total. I start to talk about that it'll be saved in a raw .csv format. And I give the reason for why I'm using the CSV format. It's widely used in the digital humanities. Also talk about the additional costs that might need to be considered if I'm storing data. So a lot of this then is clearly outlining exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and the reasons for doing that as well. Format then of the CSV file then, so that it can be opened by software that doesn't require me to resubscribe to anything or purchase the software. It would come, and then at the end here, then I suggest how this might complement existing data sets or data in other areas. So how might it be used by other researchers in the future? And this is the great thing about when you do create a data management plan and you're trying to comply with the FAIR principles. And this is something that is outlined on the website, and I'll show you in a second. But for the FAIR principles to be achieved, you have to be able to make them findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So your data has to be able to be reused by other people, and then it can be reused in the future. And this is actually something that has happened in some of the work that I've done over the years. It's been really helpful to make it available for other people to reuse. So that's literally the first, let's say, the first section in the Science Europe guidelines. The next one I would look at then would be the data types then in number 1 as well, where you have to explain whether you're using, for example, numeric or textual or mixed media types of data. So you're really explaining then, okay, well, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we need to think about. If you've got numeric data, how will you describe that numeric data for other people to access? In what format is it? Is it PDF, XLS, doc, text, or RDF? Maybe add in their CSV and open formats is what most of the time they want to look for, open formats that can be reused. Justifying the use of certain formats, then why would you use them? I just showed you that earlier on. And in preference for open standards, as I just said. Give the details then on the volume. So it was 5 megabytes in this case, the number of objects, files, rows, and columns. On the right hand side, again, we can see the FAIR additional guidance, which looks at the different formats that can be there. Make the data available in a format that's accepted by your research community. So you might have seen there, I made sure to figure out what's widely used in the digital humanities. Well, it's CSV, and that CSV format then makes it interoperable. It might be different in different disciplines in your work. It might be different as well, but this is just something that is a good example from the digital humanities. So check a couple of potentially relevant data repositories in your field and to find out what they expect and include your findings then in your DMP. So then they have even more guidance on top of that then in section 6A for having a look into it. So you continue that then all the way down to finish out about 6 different points that need to be filled out on the guidelines that are here. The data collected and created is described all the way down. Then we go to the documentation of it. Again, it's the same thing. We have to describe the data that we've just collected. So if you think about the first bit is about describing how we're going to collect the data and the ways that you're going to store that data once you've created it. The documentation then is the next one, which really describes what sort of what sort of files you're going to use to describe it. So I would use a README file in this case. A README file is simply a text file that sits beside a data set, and it describes that data set. Okay, it describes the particular details of the creation of it, so that other people in the future can come back to this data set and have a look at it and understand how it was created. There'll be a description of how the data could be used in the future then as well, as it exists here in the data management plan, but it also will exist in the README. Because if you create a README and you put it beside the data sets, let's say on github.com or on Zenodo, then people in future can come back and they'll always see that information is together about the files. If you put it in just into your PhD, someone has to plow right down through the PhD to find where the information about the data sets is. So it's a good idea just to keep your description of your data sets right beside the data sets wherever they go. Documentation then of how data was collected, in-depth documentation on how it was processed, provided in the thesis, should future scholars need to access that data. So obviously in this case, there was an awful lot more information in the thesis there about that process as well. I'd suggest that you probably, in this case, it wasn't sufficient inside the thesis itself. It's probably better to have it in the README file and have everything that that describes the data sets in the README file, so that people can always come back and understand what's there when they want to use it. In this case, there were some visualizations of that data then that were documented and saved in the Wayback Machine, and this was during the project itself. But later on, then it was decided then to use that code and those visualizations and add it to github.com and Zenodo. So those are the places where you can have more long-term, let's say, preservation of it. The resultant data then is made available for future scholars, and no constraints are placed on the data. So I'm giving a CC BY license included so that other people can reuse it as long as they reference back to it. And that's documented later on in the project itself. So we have ethics and legal compliance section. It's not exactly the same as the Science Europe one in DMP, but it's very similar. And this section was quite short in this project, so I'm not covering that one today, but it's very similar in how you will actually comply with the rules and regulations in your institution. Storage and backup, that's something that I will look at a little bit more in data retention in the next webinar, and then selection and preservation, and the last few there. So there's a bunch of extra ones that you need to fill out here to finish off your data management plan. And those details for that can be found on the research data management section of MTU Library's website. You'll see here, I introduced the FAIR principles, the MTU data policies, so anything that relates to data management, I've listed out the different policies that exist in MTU for that. I go through a very short setup on writing a DMP, including Therese's work as well. And then I talk a little bit more about research data retention. And this will, again, lessons webinars to come up later on. Research data storage then and copyright licensing are probably the last two that you go through in detail before finishing off your plan. And then if you need any extra support and training, then we're available here in the library for that. So once you've finished all of this work here, on filling out all the details, you have it saved. So make sure you go down to the bottom here, check everything has been finished, and then you can go into research outputs. I've here said that I'm going to create different data sets, and those data sets then are going to be made available, and this will come out on the plan itself, showing what I intend on creating. And again, this is created along the way. It's updated different times during the process, because you might come to a point where you create a new data set in the middle of a project, and then you have to add that in there as well. So it's not just looking into the future, it's actually updating as you go along. Looked at this before. This plan is actually public at the moment, so if you want something to work off, it might be helpful to use this one as a public one. There are a number of different public DMPs that you can look at. If you go up to the top on the website here, you'll see public DMPs, and this one come up as the first at the moment. It's in from UCC as well, because that's where the research was done. At the end here, you can see the download. We had this before, and if you click on download plan, then it prints off, or it'll save it in a PDF format, and then you can have a look at how the plan is created itself. So it's complete for the time that a certain amount of information was known about it. It's completed, but it doesn't mean that it's finished completely. And I would say that a data management plan is always needing updating along the way, but it's a very helpful document in terms of keeping everything together for what you're doing in your work. A lot of the time in research projects, things can go sideways and go into different areas, and you'll end up in doing a lot of research in different areas. But this always keeps your plan in check, and you can see what you're doing and what you've added on at different times. There can be different versions of these data management plans. You need to check with your funder requirements for that, or check in your field as well, what do people do for that. But you can create different versions of it in order to see what's being updated along the way. And so you'll see that there's basically a few paragraphs on each different part of it. It can be as long as you like, or it can be as short as you like. But the main points in Science Europe should be adhered to if you want to have this plan passed off or passed in general, because each one of those questions is also corresponds to ethics as well, and making sure that you've got everything thought about, that you've crossed everything out, and you've checked off everything that you need, that should be needed in your research project. So that's probably the kind of best example I could give here at the moment on how to do a DMP from something that I've got done before. But again, going back to the research data management section of the library website, this kind of lays it out much clearer there for you to be able to follow ways of creating a plan itself. And gives you the reasons for why to do it, walks you through the FAIR principles, talks about the data policies and all the different relevant material there. This section here, I suppose the most important thing about when you're writing a plan is to keep this in mind. You're always trying to verify, it's called verifying, making it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So whenever you're working with your data, you're trying to make it as open as possible and as closed as necessary. So these are important things to think about when you're actually doing your work on your data management plan. So I think that's about it for presentation. And if you have any questions on that, I welcome them. And just to let you know that we're available here for any guidance on data management plans throughout the process of your research, if it's at the start, if it's at the end, or if you're looking back on data that you want to, legacy data that you have, and you want to work with that and make it more accessible.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that, Patrick. That was very interesting. It was great to see, I suppose, one of your own, essentially, you know, because I think there's just really learning kind of from seeing kind of that practical side of it. So thanks very much for sharing that. That's very much appreciated. And something I always like with using DMP online is the fact that you actually can see those not sample ones, but other researchers' data management plans. I find it so useful that there's that openness there with it. Okay, so I was just going to say, just if there was any questions, but there is one there. Yeah, perfect. I'll let you. Yeah, so can we share the link to the library webpage there in the chat? That's no problem at all. That's an easy one to do. Does anyone else have any questions? I think, like, the one thing I suppose, and I suppose I'm just talking from personal experience here. The first time doing a DMP, it's similar to my first time doing a research ethics application form. It did take time. You know, there's a case of, look, am I doing this right? Am I on the right track or not? I think when it comes to the research ethics side, how you potentially know you're on the right track is obviously it's going to get reviewed by the Human Research Ethics Committee in the university. When it comes to the data management plan side, how is it okay that researchers reach out to yourself, Patrick, to kind of see, look, are they on the right track for this?
Yeah, that's the point. Like, you're starting out with blank form, and you're trying to figure out, you know, what do I need to put in here, what's right and what's wrong. One of the biggest things with the data management plan is you're not just ticking off the checkboxes, you're actually thinking about your project a bit more deeply and kind of trying to bring together all the different strands of your work so that you don't leave anything out. We can help you from our side when you have developed your idea a bit more to have a kind of a more close viewpoint on where you're going with your work itself. But again, you know, if you really don't know where to start, definitely get in touch with us, because we can bring you along and show you exactly what you need to know on that. What I was showing you there today, looking back on this, I mean, if you use the example that's there, that's just one example, but it's from the arts and humanities, obviously. And it's also a specific project that had data that related to archives. So it's more of archival nature. Now, let's say you've got information that's not of archival nature and you want to delete the information after the project, then you might be thinking about data retention and how long will you hold on to that information. And it becomes a totally different way of thinking about it then. So everyone's project's going to be different. Everyone's field is different, so we have to come along and try and see how we can help in that. But your very basic description of your project, you know, everyone's going to be talking about how they collected their information and how they stored it in pretty much similar way. But it's about the specifics of your own project that need to be worked out in the longer term. So yeah, so if you have information about your project and as much as you can, and then when you share that with us, then we can start to work with you on it. But we need to know a little bit more about it first.
Super. Thanks very much, Patrick. Any questions, anyone? Okay, so maybe just kind of an observation or comment from myself there, because it's you can see there is a kind of, Patrick would have touched on the idea of the research ethics as well. Like there is an element to, and you can see it's called out in the DMP online, as well as a section of a plan. It's what I'd find, again, is speaking from my experience here, is having a data management plan done before you go to a research ethics committee is helpful. It's not a requirement in the university, that's important to kind of flag as well, but it is something that's helpful because essentially you're planning ahead, and like how you plan on, I suppose, managing your data and storing your data, that's information that you put into DMP, but it's also an information that would be put into a research ethics application form. So it can complement it. Like the workload is you're kind of two birds with one stone to a certain extent, but I suppose it's important nonetheless to say that it's not a requirement for the research ethics process to have a DMP online, DMP, but very much encouraged, especially when you're collaborating across, maybe with colleagues across outside the university, is what I was thinking of. Having kind of a data management plan or even a data sharing agreement is something that is just really, really helpful, and just something that can be leveraged as well in those collaborative studies that you might be involved in.
And that could add well about like GDPR as well in different jurisdictions. You know, you have to think about all these things and have them ready, and it's good to have them early on and start it early on, get into it early on, and have it described and have everything covered before you go too far into it. So the data management plan is really good at the start that way, because it gets you thinking about how you're going to collect it and the certain rules that are there. And then again, all of that policy information is available on that page, on the policies page on research data management section of the website and the MTU library website. And you can have a look there and see, are you complying with a lot of those policies as well, and making sure that you've got that done. And of course, data retention is also another thing that crosses over into ethics as well. So if you've thought about data retention and where you're going to store your data as well, that'll help you massively before you do your ethics application. And I was kind of saying to a researcher yesterday, it's probably, you know, it's a way better idea to have it all ready and done before sending to the ethics committee, rather than something coming back for a resubmit. So it's good to have everything kind of thought out thoroughly before you do submit your data management plan and your ethics as well. So we are here to help bring that along. Anytime you've got any information that you want to find out about, just contact us and we can help you with that. Anything small or big, whatever it is.
Super. Thanks very much, Patrick. I think if there's no other questions, I'd say we can leave it there. Like the whole idea to these bite-sized webinars is that they're be very pointed, kind of cover a particular topic, and then that's it. So look, thanks very much. Today's topic was on how to complete a research data management plan. Next week, Patrick's going to be back to how to plan, excuse me, how to plan for research data retention. So if you haven't registered for that, the link there to register, or the QR code to register there is on your screen. But I think we can leave it there. So thanks very much, Patrick, for the time that you did for today's webinar and preparing for it as well. Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Absolutely. No
Yeah.
problem.
So basically, my question is like, if I'm dealing with big data projects, and I'm not able to accurately estimate the size of the data, so how should I deal with that? And secondly, like the size of the data could actually be tens of gigabytes or even hundreds of gigabytes. So would that then, putting that on the data management plan, would that draw further questions? Does that need to be justified? How do you deal with those situations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually, and that goes back to the point of why the plan itself is like a living document. So you might not know initially what size it's going to be. During the processing of it, you might start to find out, okay, now we've got a lot more. Then you can update it in the next version of it, and then also, depending on what are the limitations on storage then as well. Like if there are limitations on storage, you got to find out that information there as well. But just in general, it's as you work through it, it's a work in progress, and you can log back into DMP Online, update whatever's there, and continue on from there. So there's no hard and fast rule. It's just that you have your information down when you know it. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect. That's great. So look, thanks again, Patrick, and we'll see you next week. All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.